What is going on, everyone? Welcome back into another episode of the 415ers podcast. As always, brought to you by the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network with 95.7 The Game. Mark Grandy, Evan Giddings with you as always. Mark, my man, how are you doing on this fine day, midweek day between the 49ers' last win, an extended break, and now their upcoming game against the Washington Commanders?
I'm doing well, Evan. How are you? I notice our listeners and watchers on YouTube notice a different setting for you. I know you're down in San Diego with a little bit of some family holiday time. So how's sunny San Diego treating you?
Oh, it is perfect. I know people are a little pissed today down here. It was only 72 degrees. There was not a cloud in the sky, although it was a wee bit chilly, brisk
A
sea
little
air
bit.
coming off the coast, just a little bit. Apologize to all of those of you in the background. I think we're allowed to air Seinfeld in the background for those watching on YouTube. But yes, Mark, I am in full family vacay mode. Thank you for noticing.
That's great. It's great. Yeah, I'm jealous of you. Not quite on my vacation. I'm taking some time off next week, but should be a lot of fun. And you mentioned Niners on kind of a mini bye, even though this week is kind of a short week because their game is Saturday instead of Sunday. They take on the Washington Commanders on Christmas Eve. There are 3 NFL games on Christmas, but most of the week 16 slate across the NFL is on Saturday where the Niners play. So they have extra time off. They've taken some time off to help their bodies get ready and heal and feel better. But oddly enough, their schedule is kind of pushed forward because they don't play on Sunday.
Yeah, it is interesting. And look, even though it doesn't seem like there's a lot of stuff, I guess, going on currently with the 49ers, they took care of business against Seattle. They won the division. They're into the playoffs. They own at least the 3 seed in the NFC. But Mark, we do have a little bit of news as this episode is preparing to drop on Tuesday late, or if you catch it Wednesday before the Pro Bowl rosters are announced for both conferences. And as you might imagine, the 49ers are at the top due to, of course, their amazing roster this year, but they lead combined all vote getters around the entire football league. So, looking at the 49ers right now, they lead in 6 different NFC positions when it comes to the fan voting, of course, not anything official. But Mark, before we dig into that, are you surprised at all that the 49ers would be anywhere near the top of any Pro Bowl related type of accolade?
Absolutely not. With how many stars this Niner team has, they deserve to have a handful at least in the Pro Bowl. And I know we've kind of gotten to the point where Pro Bowl nods don't mean quite as much anymore. I know they're still important and players care about them. They go out to, what is it, Vegas now and have time and spend some time with family. They bring out their family and friends and hang out in Vegas with their peers and, other great players across the league, and they have a good time. But it doesn't quite mean as much, it seems, as it has in the past. But it feels like it means something to the 49ers. Of course, they hope that they don't participate in the Pro Bowl festivities because they hope that they're preparing for a Super Bowl when the Pro Bowl is going on. But I know Fred Warner, he's been pretty vocal about it on Twitter, and he jumped from ninth in linebackers all the way to first when the last Pro Bowl fan vote numbers were released on Monday of this week. And he was on Twitter, talking about, hey, faithful, like, you got to get me to the Pro Bowl. Like, come on, let's churn out some votes. So, I mean, he was doing a little bit of self-campaigning, and it worked out to get from ninth to first. There are, other 49ers who are at the top as well, leading their positions. Nick Bosa, George Kittle, Kyle Juszczyk, Christian McCaffrey. I mentioned Fred Warner, also Trent Williams. There are other players as well who have a very good chance of going to the Pro Bowl, like Dre Greenlaw. But no, I am not surprised at all. This seems to be a group that wants to be recognized, and it also is a fan base that is generally pretty public. There are a lot of 49er fans out there, and they're not shy when it comes to voting for their guys.
Yeah, and that's what I think it kind of is representative of. Obviously it's a fan vote, but it does, I think, indicate just how much talent or names notoriety there is around San Francisco and how much support there is from, of course, the fans. Look, I don't expect this 49ers team to break any records. We're talking about whether the Pro Bowl means much. Well, I think the most that a team had selected was 12 players, which the 49ers could come near, depending. I mean, right now, they got 6 guys in different positions that you just laid out that are leading all vote getters. Together, I guess they jumped the Minnesota Vikings, who were leading, surprisingly, I think, all fan voting combined last week prior to week 15. This week it's the 49ers. But of course, the one thing that naturally jumps out to me is, of course, it's no quarterback. Like, obviously, that's a
Yeah.
position that you generally try to, associate with how a certain team is doing, how much talent is around him. And it just goes to show when you're looking at all these different names and whether they're, the best at their position or not, who's to say? Although Nick Bosa, I think, appropriately has the most votes by a defensive player overall, probably at this point the leader for DPOY, along with maybe Micah Parsons. Um, but Mark, it's just like just how I mean, we know because we watch it every single week, but I think for a lot of people around the country that understand how good the 49ers are going to get to sort of put names at certain positions to just how stacked this roster is built from the inside out. Not, of course, needing a big name at quarterback, even though you'd like to have one, in order to make sure that you know, you're a team that's got 7 wins in its last 7 games and is the reason why a lot of teams around the NFL and especially in the NFC are afraid of them probably come playoff time.
Well, let's pretend we were having this conversation at the beginning of the season. Let's say, all right, predict, which Niners will make the Pro Bowl this year. You could get a lot of these right. I mean, those 6 guys that we just mentioned that are leading their positions. McCaffrey, obviously, we didn't know McCaffrey was a Niner, but if we knew McCaffrey was a Niner to start the season, we would predict he'd be a Pro Bowler. Juszczyk is an every year Pro Bowler just because there's not many fullbacks left. Trent Williams, the best left tackle, best offensive lineman, maybe the best player in football. George Kittle is one of the best tight ends. Nick Bosa and Fred Warner, they're at the very top of their positions as well. So those all make sense, but there would have been one other that you would have thought most likely, and that's Deebo Samuel. But Deebo Samuel hasn't had the kind of season to where, he probably deserves a Pro Bowl nod. And, he missed a game, that second game against the Los Angeles Rams. The Niners still dominated that game thanks to Christian McCaffrey. But besides that, he's played in most of the games. He's been banged up. He's a little banged up right now as well. He's not a full participant in practice this week up to this point as we record this here Tuesday evening. Um, but you would be a little surprised if you were asked, about Pro Bowl possibilities at the start of the season to learn that Deebo Samuel is kind of off that radar right now. Or maybe a lot of that is because of Christian McCaffrey's acquisition, and Deebo Samuel hasn't been asked to do as much as he needed to do last year. But I think if you were to ask 49er fans or tell 49er fans at the start of the year, hey, Deebo Samuel is not a Pro Bowler, they probably would be thinking this team is in trouble and not going to win the division and maybe might not be in a playoff spot. So it's kind of interesting to think of it from that perspective, how we would have thought about, these Pro Bowlers at the beginning of the year because Deebo Samuel would be left out. But the Niners have obviously been um, great, even without an incredible Deebo Samuel. He's still been good, don't get me wrong. But he's unlikely going to be a Pro Bowler. But kind of interesting to think about how your perspective changes, obviously based on how the season goes.
And your perspective also changes to me on how many of these guys are like homegrown. I
Mm.
think that's something that stands out to me as well. Look, obviously Williams, Juszczyk, like those guys are coming from the outside. But when you take a look at the amount of homegrown talent, and look, Pro Bowl is not the end all be all of the NFL. I think it's, as we've talked about, a good indicator of kind of the talent level on your team. But when you also combine that with guys that you've drafted, to me, that's where you tend to strike gold and where you begin to see just how good a team really is because you get those guys early in their career. You initiate and you bring them into the system. And you also, of course, get the added benefit of having them for 4 years on their rookie deals. If you look at now John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan going back to 2017, right now they're at 6 full draft classes. So the first 3 draft classes involve the guys that we're talking about, which is George Kittle, former 5th round pick, Fred Warner, former 3rd round pick, and then Nick Bosa at the top of the 2019 draft. But a guy like Dre Greenlaw could be making his first Pro Bowl this year from the 2019 draft class. Looking even further ahead, there haven't been as many guys, I guess, bestowed the accolades of those former classes. But you're looking at a guy like Talanoa Hufanga from last year who might be, involved in his first Pro Bowl. There are certainly other guys worthy of consideration. But, when I'm looking at the 49ers and how they're constructed, even though, yes, you do have a couple of big boy acquisitions in a guy like Trent Williams or others around them, it just really points out and highlights to me how much the 49ers have been built from the inside out. And that is really of course, the key to sustained success. And I think the reason why they're reaping the benefits now of 3 postseason berths in 4 years, it's because of been how well that they have drafted.
Yeah, it's those players that you're talking about, those homegrown players, George Kittle and Talanoa Hufanga and Dre Greenlaw and Fred Warner. It's those guys that are kind of the steady, sturdy base. And then you build up Nick Bosa, obviously, is a big part of that group. And then you build off that base with good acquisitions. And that's Kyle Juszczyk, that's Trent Williams, that's Christian McCaffrey, that's Mooney Ward. And that's how you build not just a quality team, but a legitimate Super Bowl contender. And with that in mind, I kind of want to play a little game with you here. So I think we can all agree 6 Pro Bowlers for the 49ers. Those 6 that we spent most of this
At
time.
least.
Yeah,
Yeah.
at least. There's 6 100% like givens. Those guys are in. Christian McCaffrey, Kyle Juszczyk, Trent Williams, George Kittle, Nick Bosa, and Fred Warner. You mentioned Dre Greenlaw and Talanoa Hufanga. I just mentioned Charvarius Mooney Ward. I think there's maybe another 1 or 2 potential guys out there. Jimmy Ward comes to mind, although he did miss some time, and I'm not sure he's played enough games to get that honor. But I'm going to set, Evan, the over-under for 49ers Pro Bowlers at 8.5. So again, those 6 guys that we are very, very confident are in my mind, you have Dre Greenlaw and Talanoa Hufanga are the 2 most likely after that first group of 6. And then you have a couple of guys who maybe are on the edge in Charvarius Ward and in Jimmy Ward, maybe a couple of other guys. So 8.5 Pro Bowlers, Evan. Are you taking the over or the under for the 49ers?
Ooh, see, this is a tough one. And this is where I also do think being a Pro Bowler is something that is important because generally it means you're about a top 3 player at your position. And so if you're looking around the rest of the DBs in the NFL,
Hmm.
first, of course, you're looking at cornerback. I do think Charvarius Ward would be right now a top 3 cornerback or, right side, left side, one of the top 6 cornerbacks in the NFC. Talanoa Hufanga for me is on the kind of the brink of being a top 3 safety. I think that he had an amazing start to this season, and I think that he has gotten better, but I think he's also shown some of those kind of hit or miss, boomer bust tendencies that played in his favor earlier on this year, making some huge plays, but then in recent weeks has also been burnt a little bit a few times. So for me, like that to me is going to be a coin flip. I'm going to be optimistic, though, and say that they do get 9 Pro Bowlers this
Mm.
year because the reason being, we see that teams that are at the top of their conference tend to be rewarded with lots of Pro Bowl selections. So obviously you have the Eagles up there. The 49ers will be second at the table for me outside of maybe Buffalo when you're looking at overall rosters with tons of guys to pick from. So I would put that at 9, and I might even venture to say you could get a 10th, if you end up with maybe a special teams player or you end up with a kicker or a punter. So there's maybe an extra throw in there. I would take the over on 8.5.
I think I agree with you. The original 8 or the original 6. I think Dre Greenlaw and Talanoa Hufanga get in. Hufanga, you mentioned, had a fantastic start to the season. Hasn't been as eye popping lately. He still played solid, but he hasn't had as many of those big plays where everyone just heads to Twitter and tweets out Talanoa Hufanga in all caps. That hasn't been quite as common, but I think he's done enough to get in. And then I think Mooney Ward gets in. I really think he's had a phenomenal season for the 49ers. you are the number one corner on the best defense in the league, I think almost by default you deserve to be in. And, maybe you get to a point where you just simply have too many 49ers, but he deserves it. So I'll take the over as well, but just barely. I think 9. I think that's where the Niners will end up. I'm not sure. I don't think Jimmy Ward gets in because of the games he missed. And I would say no to a special teamer or anything of that sort. So I'm saying 9 Pro Bowlers for the 49ers, which, as you mentioned off the top, not a new record, but nothing to scoff at. That's pretty good.
No, and I mean, you could end up with a situation where they have more Pro Bowl selections than maybe the Eagles,
Yeah.
and that's really something to pay attention to.